So enough from me. I'm very happy to turn things over to our first speaker, Dr. Sarah Schwartz, who is an assistant professor of psychology at Suffolk University. And Dr. Schwartz's research focuses on ways in which mentoring relationships and networks of support foster healthy outcomes during the transition to adulthood. She conducted early and influential research on youth-initiated mentoring, and more recently, she's received funding from the WT Grant Foundation to evaluate an intervention she developed to teach first-generation college students to cultivate mentoring relationships and social capital in the transition to college. Over to you, Sarah. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. I know it's been quite a few eventful weeks for you.
Hi, everyone. So glad to be here, and thank you, Veronique, for bringing me here, and I'm eager also to hear about Ben's research as well. So yeah, excited to be with all of you, and yeah, I think a lot of folks in my country have been looking longingly up north towards Canada in, well, the last 4 years, but particularly also the last week. So so the connection is appreciated. So I'm going to jump right in because, again, I'll probably be trying to go through more research than I have time for, as usual, but feel free to share questions in the chat, and the moderators can make sure that I hear them if I don't keep up with the chat. So I'm going to be today, let's see, I just want to make sure that I know how to, okay, there we go. Changing slides, worked? Yes. So today I'm going to briefly talk about some introduction framing theories. This is actually going to build on the previous webinars, particularly Shannon Varga's work. So I'll go over that quickly in case you got to hear that already. Then I'll be talking a little bit about youth-initiated mentoring, a little bit about Connected Scholars, which is this kind of social capital workshop that that builds on youth-initiated mentoring, and then a little bit about what we call network engaged mentoring, which is really thinking about how formal mentoring programs can encourage young people to cultivate circles of support. And then you'll get to hear more from Ben about his work on youth-initiated mentoring as well. So this slide you probably saw if you saw Shannon Varga's presentation, and this is basically the idea of moving beyond just focusing on cultivating a single one-on-one mentoring relationship to really how can we cultivate webs of support for young people. And this is really a kind of guiding frame in the research that I'm doing, and I've been studying mentoring for a long time now. A lot of my research began on more traditional big brothers, big sisters models in mentoring, but I've been moving more towards, the addition of one caring adult is really important, but it's kind of necessary but not sufficient. And we really want to help young people cultivate networks of support throughout their lives. I also wanted to briefly touch on one other theory put forth by Tara Yasso, which is what they call the community cultural wealth theory. And when thinking about mentoring, often we come at it from the frame of social capital and the idea of the way relationships can give us access to information, tangible support, resources, and that frame often focuses on how, on the social capital that's often available from higher status individuals that then can help lower status individuals access that capital. But I think it's also really important to recognize the many different sources of support and capital that are available within communities. So this cultural wealth model focuses on, that maybe if you're thinking about a young person in an immigrant community or low-income neighborhood, that their family members who haven't gone to college may not have the type of support or capital that can help them complete a college application. And so we want to make sure they have access to those types of support, but they are offering a lot of important types of support, like resistant capital. How do you navigate an unjust society, and what do you do when you face systemic inequality or systemic racism in a way that white college educated mentor may not be able to provide that same type of support. So we really want to think broadly about the different types of support and capital that different people in young people's networks are offering. So again, these are kind of two frames that when I think about what mentoring can do and some of the interventions I'm talking about moving forward, that we can bear in mind. And so finally, I just want to bring this together with what I think about as a developmental systems approach to mentoring, where the goal is to develop both individual and environmental assets in youth. So again, in mentoring, this includes both to promote connectedness by strengthening individual and environmental assets and the fit between the two. And that means, again, often mentoring has focused on this environmental piece of we'll bring a mentor into this young person's life and increase the availability of supportive adults, and thereby be increasing environmental assets in the young person's life. But equally important, I would argue, is strengthening those individual assets that allow young people to become connected. So help-seeking skills, network orientation, and really thinking about the conditions and behaviors that give rise to the development of connectedness as kind of an active construct. So this is my Venn diagram that I often use to think about the way we think of. You know what, I don't know even if mentoring practitioners would describe it this way, but mentoring researchers have traditionally always had, there's research on formal mentoring and there's research on natural mentoring. And formal mentoring relationships are those where you have a volunteer mentor who doesn't know the youth beforehand and is assigned by a program to become a young person's mentor. And natural mentoring are those relationships that develop organically between young people and older people in their community. And the focus has generally been on formal mentoring interventions because the idea is with natural mentoring, either the relationships develop or they don't, and there's nothing that we can really do to intervene to make those develop. And what I'm going to be talking about today is really that space in between and how we can be facilitating natural mentoring relationships, sometimes in the context of formal mentoring. So this research, what got me to this research originally was research on youth-initiated mentoring, which is a model where a young person nominates someone from their existing social network to become their formal mentor. So rather than having the program assign someone, the program works with the young person to identify someone who they see as potentially supportive within their social network, and then formalizes the mentoring relationship and can make it look more like a regular formal mentoring relationship where they do the screening and the training and the monitoring of the relationship. So I think you'll hear more about this model from Ben, but I'll just say a couple things about this model. And I will just, again, webinars, I always think I can make a discussion, and then I remember in a webinar, you can't actually have a discussion. So if you would like to share with each other in chat, just thinking about where your services lie on the continuum from natural to formal mentoring, then we can start thinking about how this applies to your programs. So from a recent meta-analysis that actually was just accepted, so is not formally out yet, but again, there's not a lot of studies on youth-initiated mentoring because it's still quite new. I'm excited to have Ben's research be added to this. So this, with the caveat that this comes from 11 studies total on youth-initiated mentoring. In the meta-analysis, what we found, you don't really need to worry about what these specific numbers mean, but basically that the overall effect size of youth-initiated mentoring was comparable, if not greater than that of both formal mentoring and natural mentoring. And that there didn't seem to be differences in effect size across different outcome domains. So there were outcomes similar to most mentoring programs across a range of domains, from psychological health, physical health, cognitive, school, and social outcomes. So we need more research, but it's definitely encouraging. I did want to briefly, how am I doing on time? talk about some strengths and challenges of youth-initiated mentoring, which draws from some of my own research by Renee Spencer, research by Levi van Dam in the Netherlands, really thinking about, when does this work and what are the challenges that we still need to work on improving on. So I think one of the most important strengths is it recognizes youth autonomy and helps them think about how their agency in recruiting mentors. So this is a quote from a mentee who says, when I had my meeting to see like who I wanted, it was like, what's your interest? What do you like to do for fun? What do you have for your future? They ask questions. So every time they ask me some questions, I think in my mind, like, who knows me the best and who can encourage me the most? So that's really what we want young people to be thinking about. Who are those people in their network who know them best and can encourage them the most? And it's actually this process of helping young people think about who's in their network and how to recruit mentors that kind of led me to this second wave of research on connected scholars, which I'll talk about soon. Additionally, I think there's some advantages in mentor recruitment. One, that you really get a different population of mentors than you do from, a billboard saying volunteer to be a mentor, that these are people who might not necessarily volunteer for it to be a mentor for any kid, but when they're chosen by this young person, then they agree. So this mentor said, it wasn't like a professional person thinking I would be a good fit for her. It was Bailey remembering me and asking if I could do it. And how do you say no to that? I can't imagine saying no. And that's what we hear from a lot of mentors. It wasn't that I wanted to be a mentor, but it was, I want to be a mentor to that child, to that adolescent. And finally, that, there's already some trust and relationship there, so you're not starting from a blank slate. So the staff member said, the relationship is just expedited. Instead of us waiting for in our program, waiting for like 3 months, 6 months, it may be even a year for them to connect with the youth, that connection is already there. So I think this, although again, there's some challenges, which I'll talk about in a moment, that especially when you're talking about mentoring older youth or adolescents, that it's pretty hard to, say to a teenager, any of you who've worked with teenagers, which I assume is a lot, to say like, here's someone who's going to be your new best friend, like confide in them. That doesn't work. I'm an adolescent therapist, definitely doesn't work. But when the young person can actually choose someone who they say, this is someone who I feel like I can trust, then you don't need to spend that first year trying to build the relationship. And there's already a relationship there, because again, half of those relationships won't ever connect, won't ever meld. So you really get off to a head start. That said, I think there's a lot of challenges, which I hope that we will continue to explore in the research and in practice. So one is finding the mentors. So, and that's both in terms of, in every program that I've spoken with, I think one thing I would say is a lot more young people can identify mentors than I think most staff initially think. That often there's the sense of, these are young people, they don't have any connections. The reason that they need mentoring is because they don't have any connections. And there's a lot more connections there than we think. And the research I did was on the National Guard Youth Challenge program, which was for youth ages 16 through 18 who weren't in school and weren't in the workforce, so a pretty kind of disconnected group, and they were able to identify people. But it takes work. And if you just say, who do you want to be your mentor? Probably 99% of young people will say, I don't know. But with that work, a lot of them can, and still not everyone can. So a lot of programs have talked about different models of potentially having a volunteer pool to fall back on if someone really can't. And then the other piece is, even if the youth can identify someone, then just finding them takes a lot of work, So the young person says, oh yeah, Kayla, who was my after school program, like soccer person, 5 years ago, and then they're supposed to go find Kayla. So I think there's a lot more of that front end work that I think can be a hard adjustment for mentoring programs. Also navigating family relationships. On the one hand, I think it's a strength that these mentors are much more within the community. So they are connected to youth in other ways than just through this program. On the other hand, we know relationships are messy, and especially family relationships can be messy. So this is a caregiver from a program in the Netherlands who said, my son may choose her, but that doesn't mean I can talk to her. I agreed because if he wants this, go ahead. I can't say he must choose someone else, but she was involved with my son too strongly, which I understand from her perspective, but to me it meant we couldn't relate anymore. And this was a mother whose son had chosen for his youth-initiated mentor a family friend, and it changed that relationship the mother had with her friend because suddenly her son was confiding things in her friend that he wasn't confiding in her. So again, I think we want to hold these challenges. And then finally, premature terminations. So there's quite a bit of research on premature terminations in formal mentoring relationships. We know that they happen a lot, and we know that it can cause harm. We know less about those premature terminations in youth-initiated mentoring. It seems to happen a lot more rarely, but when it does happen, I think it causes more harm. Because this isn't just some random volunteer that let you down. This is someone who you chose that let you down. And this is from an interview that I conducted with a kid from the National Guard Youth Challenge program who had chosen his football coach to be his mentor, and then the mentor just kind of disappeared. And I was interviewing him 3 years after this happened, and you can still see the pain in his response. Every time I tried to call him or anything, he didn't pick up the freaking phone. It was horrible. It was like getting your back stabbed. So I think that's also a really important piece to hold when we're thinking about youth-initiated mentoring, how we're protecting against those premature terminations and how we're supporting youth if that happens. And again, this is also an issue in traditional mentoring, but I think it's even more salient in this context. So I'm going to move on, and you will get to hear more about youth-initiated mentoring later. So as I said, for me, I think one of the pieces that felt most interesting about youth-initiated mentoring was this piece of how we help young people identify potential mentors in their lives. And so I had the question of, can we take a step back? And to me, it seems like it's an intervention in and of itself doing that, even if we never formalize the mentoring relationship. So I was thinking, how can we create mentor magnets? How can we create young people who are thinking about their networks of support, are reaching out and getting support from those people, are recruiting mentors as they can, even without, again, a program that is formally matching them. And we often use the analogy of, rather than teaching someone, I always get this wrong, rather than giving someone a fish and then they can eat for a day, we teach them to fish and they can eat for a lifetime. So really, how can we teach young people to fish for mentors, teach that skill set? Because some young people have that skill set and are able to recruit these really deep networks of support. And then the other side that we often talk about is also stocking the pond, to keep going with my metaphor. So also, how can we be making more supportive adults available in young people's lives, and teaching those adults, and this is something that I think Sophia talked about in everyday mentoring, how can we train the people who already are having contact with young people to take advantage of those potential mentoring moments. So I'll be talking about the youth training side. So we developed an intervention that we called Connected Scholars, which we thought about rather than just as a mentoring intervention, as a social capital intervention. So the goal was not just about creating, a single one-on-one mentoring relationship, but creating networks of support. And we developed this in the context of thinking about that transition to college. So the first pilot we developed was with a college readiness program for first generation college students or students of color and low income students. And basically this program said, we've gotten really good at getting our students into college, and we support them throughout their 4 years of high school, and they get into college, and then they lose our support system and they never gain a support system in college, and they don't complete college. So how can we help them gain that support system in college, even when we're not there to support them. So that was really our goal in developing this intervention. So our model of change is, which we're still in the process of evaluating. So this is our, like, we hope this happens, is this intervention would increase knowledge about the value of mentoring and social capital and resources available, increase skills around help recruiting, self-advocacy, networking, and attitudes for increased openness to seeking support and a sense of the value of a network, and self-efficacy and asking for support. And then the idea is this would increase social capital. Again, we were thinking about this in the context of transition to college, although it could be in other contexts as well. So we were thinking about bolstering both college systems of support, so those on-campus connections, as well as home systems of support, so that maintains social capital and mentoring relationships in both on and off campus. And again, really thinking about that cultural wealth model of all of the different valuable sources of support, because especially during the transition of college, we wanted to be really careful about not giving the message that some types of support are more valuable than others. And then in theory, this increased support would lead to greater psychological functioning, academic engagement, and academic outcomes, which ideally would ultimately lead to increased retention. So the overview of our workshops, this is from our original pilot, was what's a mentor? How can a mentor help me? Who are the adults and potential supports of my life? How do I identify and recruit mentors? How do I cultivate and maintain relationships? How do I overcome challenges related to networking and mentoring? How do I build mentoring relationships in college? And how do I build my social network and become a mentor magnet? And we ended it with like a speed networking event where there were various professionals and folks from college and high school students, and the high school students would need to practice introducing themselves and give out their business cards, and really thinking about how do you start building these connections, because often, again, that initial, like, just introducing yourself piece can be a heavy lift for a lot of young people. So just a couple quotes from some of the high school students who we worked with in the original pilot. So this young man said, "I always used to be a guy who just sits around because I didn't like approaching people. So now I'm like, I should go for it, because you're always going to need somebody there to help you, somebody by your side, somebody who always has your back." And this was actually quite a remarkable transformation, because when we first started discussions at the beginning of the course about reaching out and asking for help, this program was primarily working with Haitian immigrant students, and there was a strong sense of, I should be able to do it myself, especially, a young man of color. I shouldn't be reaching out for support. That isn't strong, that isn't independent, and really being able to shift to, you need someone who has your back. And then another young woman said, "I didn't know you can just ask a person if they know someone that's kind of related to something you want to do." And there, she was really basically saying, "I didn't know you could network." And she was saying that she wanted to be a doctor when she grew up. And she's like, "I don't know anyone who's a doctor, so I could never talk to anyone." And the idea that she could ask her teachers in high school, "Do you know anyone who's a doctor who you could connect me with and I could have a conversation with them?" that was really powerful for her. So as a follow-up, then we actually did a condensed 4-session version of this workshop, where we did it in a college bridge program for primarily students of color and first-generation college students, and basically had 4 one-hour sessions. And we have a lot of qualitative data too, which I won't speak to today, but what we found was that students who had this 4-session workshop had, compared to a comparison group, had a greater network orientation. So that's seeing the value in adults in their lives. They had reduced help-seeking avoidance, so we're more likely to say they would ask for help if they were struggling in a class rather than just guessing on their work. They reported increased intention to seek support and network and do things like reach out to potential career connections. They reported better relationships with instructors and closer relationships with instructors. And finally, at the end of their first year in college, actually had higher GPAs. And I have to admit, I was a little surprised by the GPA finding, but that when we kind of thought more deeply about it and when I started sharing this, what we know is that a lot of young people, particularly first generation college students, if they do badly in a class in college, they take that as I don't deserve to be in college, rather than going and meeting with a professor and saying, how can I do better? So if we're able to shift that help-seeking behavior, that actually I think can make a big difference in grades. So we're still conducting more research on this. So hopefully more results to be reported soon. But I wanted to now shift back towards more traditional mentoring models. So again, I don't know exactly who's in the audience, but my guess is that a lot of folks are in more traditional one-on-one mentoring relationship programs. And I'm really intrigued by the potential for kind of merging these models. So the Center for Promise, which is actually also where Shannon Varga works, put forth this model of anchors and webs, which I think is really a powerful model. I also like metaphors a lot, as you can tell. Mentors can serve as anchors connecting youth to webs of support. So they have a quote that says, students could be standing in a room full of support, but they need someone to turn on the light so they can see what's there and reach for it. So I think, for me, I really think that the formal mentor can be that anchor who can help a young person access a broader web of support. And so I want to talk a little bit about what we call network engaged mentoring, which I think is a promising model for how we can have formal mentors be working to develop these webs of support. And I know right now unpublished, but also Tim Cavell and Carla Herrera and Karen Shaver have been looking into what this model could look like in Canada as well. And yeah, I think there were some challenges and potential. So this is, again, I can think a model that we're still thinking about what this could look like. So we would love to get your feedback on thoughts about what this could really look like and on the practice end. And so what I'm showing you now is another recent study that actually was led by one of my doctoral students that was looking in a broad US-based national traditional mentoring data set. So Big Brothers Big Sisters programs. And what we looked at was mentor reported behaviors around connecting. So I'm actually going to go to the next slide and then I think come back to this one. So when we talk about connecting, these were actually the items that mentors reported on. So they said, we asked them, how often did you introduce my mentee to interesting or influential adults in the community, introduce mentee to school or community services or resources that could support them, introduce mentee to new situations and settings, and connect my mentee with someone who could teach them a skill or provide guidance. And so what we found is that mentors who reported more of those connecting behaviors, those mentees had better outcomes than any of the other mentees. So particularly showed greater improvements in parent-child relationship, showed greater increases in involvement in extracurricular activities, and increases in help-seeking behavior based on the youth report. So I think, again, I can say more about the study and I'm happy to send it to you as well. But I know that sometimes there's been pushback about, the mentor needs to focus just on being close with their mentee, because if they focus on other relationships, then you'll lose that closeness. And what we saw is that actually the mentors who were doing more of this connecting behaviors were also closer with their mentees, but also that these connecting behaviors could lead to, again, increases in help-seeking behavior and increases in being connected in their community. And for most mentoring relationships, again, there's always those like amazing relationships that last forever, but most traditional mentoring relationships don't last more than 1 to 2 years. And so I think part of the goal of mentoring should be, when that formal mentor leaves, how do we make sure that that young person is still connected with other adults in their communities? And I think network engaged mentoring could be a model where the mentor is doing some of these kind of connected scholars workshops almost in a one-on-one setting, or thinking with their mentee about who are the other adults in your life, who are the people who you can reach out to, how can we connect you more? And that could lead to both a close relationship between the mentor and mentee, as well as a greater circle of support. So coming back to big picture, and then I will wrap up. So again, kind of the space where I would like to see the mentoring field going is continuing to expand our approach to mentoring. So having formal mentoring, having natural mentoring, and then having a whole lot of different models in this space in between. So youth-initiated mentoring, Lindsay Wheeler and Tim Cavell are also doing research on what they call caregiver-initiated mentoring, which is really kind of an idea of youth-initiated mentoring for younger kids. So rather than the young person being the one who's initiating and nominating those potential mentors, their caregivers are. But again, kind of thinking about a more community-based model where the connection is coming from someone within an existing social network rather than outside. Also, more on the natural mentoring side, we have these types of workshops that are just teaching young people to develop and cultivate natural mentoring relationships, everyday mentoring, which again, Sophia Duck talked more about in the last webinar, network engaged mentoring, which would be more on the formal mentoring side, but again, just with a broader eye towards also who are the other adults in this young person's life. And I'm sure that there's a whole lot of other things that we could be putting in that Venn diagram that I would love to hear from all of you about, what are the other ways that we can be facilitating natural mentoring relationships, potentially in the context of formal mentoring relationships, which I guess leads me to my final slide, which is to consider or share in the chat. How can we help our mentees cultivate webs of support? What are you already doing to facilitate natural mentoring relationships? What more could you be doing? What mentee training or skill building are you already doing? And again, what more could you be doing? And what would be some obstacles and benefits of incorporating some of the things that I've talked about today into your existing programming? And again, I am a strong believer in the need for research community partnerships, and to really we have complementary types of knowledge, and that some of this might be a really good fit and some of this might make no sense in certain contexts. And I would love to learn from all of you about what works and what doesn't, and where you would like to see us go as researchers and what we can learn from you. And so I will end there, but would love to, again, as much as possible, make this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I think that this was incredibly rich, and the youth-initiated mentoring has certainly been an interesting innovation in the mentoring field over the last couple of years. So the questions are still there. Please use the chat to comment and let us know what you're doing in your communities. And we're quite thrilled to be seeing some of those initiatives taking root in Canada. And I think this brings me to our next speaker, and we're very, very thrilled to be able to highlight some research that is taking place in Canada, so north of the border. Oftentimes we look to what's happening in the US, and we have some exciting things happening here. So today I'm thrilled to have Ben Dantzer, a Ph.D. student at UBC, to talk about his research plans to investigate the benefits of youth-initiated mentoring using a more participatory approach to research that invites youth and other community members to act as co-researchers. So with that said, I'll hand it over to Ben so we can save some time for discussion and conversation at the end with your Q&A. And thank you, Ben, for joining us today.
You're on mute.
Sorry. Thanks, Veronique. That was a very warm welcome. I'm excited to be here, especially along Sarah, who has been very influential in my thinking and her research, and even been able to have phone conversations about my research and things like that. So I'm very appreciative of that. So the purpose of this talk will be to give a very kind of brief, high-level introduction to my dissertation study, which I've titled Advancing Knowledge About Youth-Initiated Mentoring Through Community-Based Participatory Research. And before I begin, I just wanted to provide a land acknowledgement that during this project, I will be researching and learning on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Lenapehoik, and the Attawadron peoples. Just to provide a broader national context in Canada, so youth mentoring has recently become a national priority in Canada, with the government of Canada making a multi-million-dollar investment in youth mentoring. And this investment was partially in response to the growing mentorship gap in Canada affecting thousands of children and youth. So what Sarah was touching upon, Big Brothers Big Sisters recently announced that there's approximately 15,000 children and youth currently sitting on wait lists to be matched with a mentor and develop a supportive relationship. So kind of within that national context, my study is designed to both contribute to youth mentoring practice and research in Canada. So in terms of mentoring practice, the study is really designed to help close the mentorship gap in Canada by co-developing and implementing and evaluating a youth-initiated mentoring program with a Big Brothers Big Sisters program in Central Canada. In terms of research, my study is designed to address current recommendations for our future research on youth-initiated mentoring. So what do we still need to know? And also hopefully advance our scholarship of youth-initiated mentoring by adopting a more participatory approach to our investigations. And these recommendations were set by Sarah and her colleague Levi Van Dam in a recent publication. And as Sarah said, we don't have a lot of research on youth-initiated mentoring because it is quite a new approach. So my study is really designed to contribute knowledge to the mentor nomination process. So, what are some of the elements of successful nominations? What are some of the barriers and challenges that youth and their families may face? And what are the perspectives of mentoring practitioners during this process? We also need more research on the nature and quality of these relationships. So what do mentors actually say and do during their mentoring sessions that can help produce positive outcomes? So a little bit more of kind of naturalistic observational data. And then finally, in terms of the outcomes, Sarah mentioned that we have a building kind of knowledge of the outcomes that can be produced for youth, but we need a little bit more research on the outcomes for parents, for mentors, and also for mentoring practitioners and their mentoring organizations. So as I mentioned earlier, my study is really designed to take a more participatory approach to research, which is often labeled community-based participatory research, or CBPR. So for those of you who don't already know, CBPR is a collaborative approach to conducting research with community members. So it's this idea that community members are experts in their own lives and communities, and as researchers, it is our responsibility to position them as co-researchers, so to broaden and deepen the composition of our research teams to also include youth, their parents or primary caregivers, the mentors, and also mentoring practitioners. So it's a really community-based approach, which really fits kind of the spirit of youth-initiated mentoring, which is celebrating the existing connections and strengths of communities and their ability to mentor their own youth. And then finally, some research has discovered that through CBPR, researchers can develop more relevant, meaningful, and ecologically valid research outcomes, which is basically a fancy term for research findings that are rooted in practice and in communities. So our research team, we will be partnering, or I will be partnering with a Big Brothers organization in central Canada. And our research team will be composed of the executive director, a mentoring practitioner, youth 12 years or older who are currently sitting on wait lists. Their parents are primary caregivers, and then the mentors that they nominate. And I'm really interested in what new insights will be surfaced by positioning community members as co-researchers. And my three sub-questions really focus on what will we learn about the mentor nomination process? What will we learn about the nature and quality of these relationships? And what will we learn about the outcomes of these relationships? And I'm also interested in how this more community-based approach will impact our fellow mentoring practitioner and co-researcher. So by inviting them to participate in the research a little bit more deeply, will we build their capacity to implement this program once the research project has concluded? And then how will this study impact our partnering mentoring organizations? So will they learn about the pros and cons of youth-initiated mentoring? Will they implement it as a permanent fixture of their programming, or how will the project in general impact the organization? So I've kind of split my study into three phases. So the first phase in the spirit of CBPR is co-planning and capacity building. So this will really involve building a relationship with the executive director and key staff members to really co-design our entire research study and mentoring program to ensure that the research questions, the research tools, the way we analyze the data is really mutually beneficial, both for me as a researcher, but for them as a program, and also for their community members in the communities that they serve. After we come to a shared vision of our project, we'll then build the mentoring practitioner's capacity to actually implement and sustain a youth-initiated mentoring program, because it might be a new approach to the mentoring practitioner. So we really want to focus on building their capacity and their comfort to initiate this program before we conduct our research. And that will also help with the sustainability of our project. Phase two is obviously the mentoring sessions and co-constructing knowledge, so collecting the data. And very briefly, this will involve the mentoring sessions. And as a data collection tool, we will use walking tours, self-report questionnaires, individual interviews, and then participatory data analysis. So the community members will actually be invited to shape the themes and the codes and the results that are produced from this study, which often isn't conducted, or it's very rare in academic research. So it's this idea that we should really build on and celebrate that local expertise. So very briefly, walking tours are, they originated in international research contexts, and it's a way for researchers to honor local knowledge and expertise. And basically, you hand over cameras and portable audio recorders, and you invite a mentor and a mentee to direct a walking tour of an environment that is both familiar and special to their mentoring relationships. So you invite them to take pictures of special people, places, or things, and really kind of describe what goes on during their mentoring sessions, what they really like, what they maybe don't like so much, and what really that relationship is to them. So it's a way for them to really co-construct their mentoring story. And by handing over the cameras and the audio recorders, it's a really good way for me as a white privileged male to decenter my researcher authority and really invite them to control what data is collected. And then finally, after we've collected our data across 6 months, we will engage in collaborative knowledge translation and dissemination. So before we do that, we'll celebrate the mentoring relationships that were developed through our study and the co-researcher contributions to our study. And then we'll engage in an internal knowledge translation and dissemination. So this is also a really important part of CBPR. It's this idea that we're not just collecting data from a community, taking that knowledge and then leaving without translating it back to the community so that they can use it to implement change in their community. So we'll do that in various ways, and I can talk about that with interested people if they email me. And then we'll also do the external knowledge translation and dissemination. So again, in the spirit of CBPR, this is the idea of sharing knowledge both within the research team, within the immediate context and community, but also to other communities. So maybe community organizations who have a vested interest in supporting their youth through mentorship, so foster homes, after school programs, things of this nature. So going out to those communities and hosting various lunch and learns, or sharing what we've learned together so that those communities can maybe learn from our results and kind of really weigh and consider the pros and cons and see if they could do something similar in their particular context. So just closing, so the implications of this type of research in Canada might be to deepen our understanding of youth-initiated mentoring. So Sarah mentioned we don't have a lot of research on this approach, so any study is welcome. And hopefully we will co-construct a more socially and culturally sensitive understanding of youth-initiated mentoring, again, by inviting everyone who participates in the study to make really deep and meaningful contributions to the design and also the outcomes and the data that we share with other people. And finally, maybe explore how we can position community members as co-researchers, in the mentoring field. So this isn't something that's often done in the mentoring field, kind of for logistical challenges. Totally understandable, but I think, within youth-initiated mentoring, this might be an opportunity for us to do research in a more collaborative way. And then finally, in terms of significance, this research has been urged by scholars of youth-initiated mentoring, so Sarah and her colleagues, also scholars in the broader mentoring community, so David Dubois and others of that nature, and then most recently by Mentor Canada. So that concludes my study. Again, honored to be here and very excited, so thank you.
Thank you, Ben. And we look forward to seeing the results in the next couple of years. I think that's going to be super interesting. And so we have a bit of time for some questions and comments from our audience. So please feel free to use the Q&A in the chat box if you have any questions. I don't think there's any at the moment, so I think it might give me an opportunity to ask one of my questions, which, Ben, when we think about youth mentoring, a lot of the time we think about older adolescents or young adults, but your project focuses on younger youth. Can you tell us a bit more about how that might change what we know and how it changes?
Yeah, certainly. I think I want to preface my response in saying that in kind of the spirit of my CBPR approach, this study has really focused on my ideas and my ideas for my research agenda. So after I get my ethics approval, I will then meet with my community partners and co-construct this. So I will actually invite them to kind of say what they like about my ideas, what they don't like, and what they would add. But during our preliminary conversations, we thought that we would focus on children 12 years or older, just for the fact that they would have kind of that capacity to identify and nominate their own mentor, as Sarah mentioned early in her presentation. I'm not exactly sure on the youngest person that's been invited to participate in a youth-initiated mentoring program thus far, but certainly 12 years old might be pushing the boundaries a bit. But I also think, my community partners strongly believe that the youth will be able to participate in that activity. So, depending on the results, our study could really, speak to the capacities and the strengths of youth, especially in Canada, and their ability to, really be empowered and advocate for themselves and be able to find their own mentors by themselves with the structured guidance of their parents and our community organizations in Canada. So yeah, good question.